It can feel satisfying to keep moving forward into new topics, but real exam readiness shows up when you can pull key ideas back into your mind quickly without needing a long warm-up or a textbook in front of you. That is why this spaced review matters for the Global Information Assurance Certification, GIAC, Security Operations Manager, GSOM, because the test environment rewards fast recognition and steady judgment under time pressure. The goal is not to relearn everything from scratch, but to strengthen retrieval so the concepts come out cleanly when you need them. Think of this review like tightening the bolts on a structure you already built, because a structure can look complete and still wobble when pressure is applied. We are going to reconnect cyber defense theory, threat intelligence, and defensible architecture into a single mental system you can recall on demand. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. The first idea to lock in is what cyber defense theory actually does for you when you are reading a scenario and deciding what matters. It gives you a model of defense as an ongoing cycle rather than a one-time purchase, so you stop thinking that one tool or one policy ends the problem. It teaches you that attackers adapt, which means defenses must be layered and must include prevention, detection, and response support working together. It also teaches you that prioritization is unavoidable because organizations have limited time and resources, so you must protect what matters most first. When you recall cyber defense theory quickly, you can explain why you are choosing a balanced, risk-based decision rather than a dramatic move that sounds strong but is not sustainable. A fast way to remember cyber defense theory is to keep 3 questions ready in your mind. What are we protecting? What could go wrong? And what do we do about it in a repeatable way? What you are protecting includes the ability of the organization to operate, not just the confidentiality of data, because downtime and disruption can be just as damaging as theft. What could go wrong includes both intentional attackers and accidental failures, because security operations must handle both. What you do about it should be repeatable, meaning it works as a standard process rather than a one-time hero action. This quick framing helps you avoid getting lost in technical details and instead focus on impact, likelihood, and the practical steps that reduce risk. When exam questions feel noisy, returning to these 3 questions often reveals what the question is really testing. Now pull threat intelligence back into view, but do it in a way that keeps it grounded and useful. Threat intelligence, TI, is information that helps you make better defensive decisions by describing threats, behaviors, and patterns that could matter to your environment. It is not proof that you are under attack, and it is not valuable just because it sounds sophisticated. Its value comes from how it changes priorities, such as what you monitor more closely, what you harden sooner, and what response actions you prepare. The biggest review point is that intelligence must be translated into something you can observe and act on. Otherwise, it remains a story that never becomes defense. If you can say what TI means for detection and response in a few sentences, you have the kind of recall the exam rewards. When you review TI quickly, remember the difference between relevance, confidence, and usefulness, because those 3 ideas prevent the 2 most common mistakes: overreaction and neglect. Relevance means the intelligence matches your environment, such as your technologies, your industry, and your real exposures. Confidence means how strongly the claim is supported, including whether the report separates observation from interpretation and admits uncertainty where appropriate. Usefulness means whether you can translate it into behaviors you can detect, decisions you can make, or controls you can adjust. Intelligence that is dramatic but irrelevant should not drive urgent changes, and intelligence that is relevant but low confidence should usually drive increased monitoring and validation rather than disruptive action. This triad gives you a fast filter so you can handle intelligence calmly instead of emotionally. The next recall target is defensible architecture, and the key word to remember is defensible, not complicated. Defensible architecture is the structural design of systems and access paths so that they are easier to protect, easier to monitor, and harder to misuse in ways that create large damage. It focuses on limiting blast radius, increasing visibility, and reducing unnecessary complexity that hides weaknesses. It also aims to support response and recovery, because architecture that makes containment impossible or investigation slow is not truly defensible. For quick recall, remember that architecture is not only networks and servers, but also identity boundaries, data flows, and the operational patterns that shape what defenders can see. If you can explain how design choices influence both prevention and response, you are thinking the way a security operations manager is expected to think. To connect these three ideas in one mental picture, treat cyber defense theory as the framework, TI as the context, and defensible architecture as the foundation. The framework tells you that defense must be layered and risk-based because attackers adapt and perfection is unrealistic. The context tells you which threats and behaviors deserve attention right now and how attackers are likely to approach targets like yours. The foundation is the design of your environment that makes layers possible, makes monitoring meaningful, and keeps failures from spreading. When you recall them together, you stop treating security as random controls and start describing it as a coherent system of decisions. That coherence is what makes your answers on exam questions sound reasonable, because you can explain the why behind your choice, not just the what. A big part of spaced review is not just remembering, but remembering quickly under pressure, and that requires retrieval practice rather than rereading. Spaced repetition, SR, is the habit of revisiting material at increasing intervals so your brain is forced to retrieve it after some forgetting has begun. That retrieval effort is what strengthens memory, because it trains your brain to rebuild the idea from partial access rather than only recognizing it when you see it written out. For an audio-first learner, this can be as simple as replaying key segments after a gap and then pausing to restate the main points without the audio continuing. The moment you can explain a concept cleanly without hearing it, you have moved from familiarity to usable recall. This is exactly the difference between feeling prepared and being prepared. When you practice retrieval for these topics, focus on short, high-value prompts that force you to produce the idea rather than recognize it. A strong prompt for cyber defense theory is to explain why layered defense matters even when you already have strong prevention, because that tests whether you understand failure and resilience. A strong prompt for TI is to explain the difference between intelligence and evidence, and how you would turn intelligence into a detection idea, because that tests translation and operational thinking. A strong prompt for defensible architecture is to explain what limiting blast radius means and why visibility is part of design, because that tests whether you see architecture as enabling response. If you can answer those prompts smoothly, you have the core. If you stumble, you have identified exactly what to review next, and that is useful feedback rather than discouragement. Another part of recalling quickly is learning to recognize common misconceptions so you do not get trapped by them in answer choices. One misconception is treating security as a product rather than a system, which leads to answers that sound like buying or deploying one thing solves the problem. Another misconception is treating TI as certainty, which leads to overconfident response decisions without enough validation. Another misconception is thinking architecture is only about building walls, which leads to designs that reduce usability without improving visibility or recovery. The exam often uses distractors that appeal to these misconceptions because they sound decisive and dramatic. When you review, deliberately remind yourself that the strongest answers usually show balanced, evidence-driven judgment, not extreme action based on limited information. To strengthen the connection between these concepts, practice describing the same scenario through all three lenses, because that trains integrated recall. Imagine a scenario where unusual logins suggest a stolen credential, and then ask what cyber defense theory says about priorities, such as validating the signal, limiting privilege, and preventing spread. Then ask what TI could contribute, such as whether this pattern matches current attacker behavior and what follow-on actions to watch for. Then ask what defensible architecture contributes, such as whether identity boundaries, segmentation, and logging make it easier to confirm and contain. This kind of mental exercise is powerful because it reveals that the concepts are not separate chapters, they are complementary tools. When you can shift between lenses quickly, you become much faster at answering blended questions. For speed, you also need a compact language for the relationship between prevention, detection, and response, because those ideas appear in nearly every management-level decision. Prevention reduces likelihood, detection reduces time to awareness, and response support reduces impact and recovery time. A defensible architecture makes all three more effective by creating clear boundaries and consistent visibility. TI improves prioritization by telling you where prevention and detection effort will likely have the highest value right now. Cyber defense theory reminds you that any one layer can fail, so you design for resilience rather than betting everything on one control. If you can say this fluently, many exam questions become easier because you can quickly see which answer choice strengthens a layered posture instead of adding a fragile patch. As you continue using SR, it helps to treat your own confusion as signal rather than as a flaw, because confusion tells you where memory is weak or where concepts are not connected yet. If you can define TI but struggle to explain how it changes detection priorities, then your missing link is translation, not definition. If you can describe layered defense but cannot explain why architecture affects response speed, then your missing link is visibility and blast radius. When you name the missing link, you can review with precision rather than repeating everything. This keeps audio-first study efficient because your replays have a purpose, and it keeps motivation steady because progress becomes visible. Over time, the gaps shrink and recall becomes faster, which is exactly what you want before the exam. By bringing cyber defense theory, TI, and defensible architecture back together and practicing retrieval through spaced review, you build the kind of readiness that shows up when the clock is running and the questions are trying to distract you. You are training yourself to recognize what matters, translate information into action, and justify choices in a way that is coherent and defensible. That is the heart of security operations management, and it is also the kind of thinking the exam is designed to measure. Keep returning to these ideas at spaced intervals, and keep forcing yourself to produce the explanation out loud or in your mind rather than passively listening. When you can recall these concepts quickly and connect them naturally, you will not just remember them, you will be able to use them, and that is what success looks like.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.